The caption, Stuart Hogg loses control in the act of scoring a try yesterday. And also at the top there's an interesting interview. Icebreaker, Ireland's speed skating pioneer in hot pursuit of Olympic dream. A nice little niche interview Mark Gallagher does with Tara Donoghue, who's an Irish speed skater born in the Netherlands to Irish parents. But she's making good waves in speed skating. Very interesting piece there as well. To the Star on Sunday, they don't really do too much on the rugby, just a small little slot at the side. Irish highs for Cooney, Faz and co. They say catch 22, Liverpool move further clear of second place in the table than any side in the history of the top flight English football. And the City Stars facing judgment play, Pep's warning. It's an exclusive saying Man City are set for a huge summer rebuild after Pep Guardiola warned his players they will face judgment day at the end of the season. It always seems that some club is facing a huge summer clear-out at this stage of the season when things aren't going to plan. It never really happens. It's always just 2 or 3 players leave. They get 2 or 3 others as well. On the back page of the Irish Sun this Sunday, Virgil van Dijk exclusive. Italian giants plot £150 million summer deal. Juventus is what their headline says.
Juventus?
Juventus.
Yes,
Juventus,
I think it's, if you do the
well
Dutch...
played,
yeah.
Juventus are plotting a stunning £150 million summer suit for Virgil van Dijk.
He's not a dinosaur.
He's not a dinosaur.
Yeah. that's how I'd read it anyway.
Also as well, this sex is on fire. Ireland 19, Scotland 12. Andy Farrell hailed as Captain Johnny Sexton for steering Ireland home against Scotland in their Six Nations opener. Back page of the Irish Sunday Mirror. Snorri Man United, but new signing Bruno a big hit with fans. Manchester United flopped in front of goal again against Wolves despite new £68 million signing Bruno Fernandes, proving a knockout with supporters. United were pretty poor again going forward yesterday, didn't really create too much, but one positive sign was Bruno Fernandes did look like he had a bit of something about him yesterday. He started the game against Wolves yesterday afternoon, and also as well, far from easy. Andy Farrell hailed his side's true Irish grit after his first match as boss ended in a nervy Six Nations victory at the Aviva Stadium. Sunday World, Scott to get better. Captain certain Ireland will improve for one big Wales test. That is after Ireland's win yesterday against Scotland at the Aviva Stadium. Johnny Sexton scoring all 19 points, but he says things have to get much, much better before Wales visit the Aviva Stadium next Saturday afternoon after their 42-0 win against Italy yesterday afternoon in Cardiff. And finally, back page of the Sunday Independent, and I say finally because this is where we're actually going to start in with the paper review. So I said I'd keep it for last when we're going through our back pages. This is part 1 of a 3-part interview over the course of the next 3 weeks that Paul Kimmage is doing with Rory McIlroy. Rory revisited, all inspired from the interview he did about 3 years ago with McIlroy, but this is going to be much bigger over the course of 3 weeks. No question off limits, no subject out of bounds, no products plugged or sponsors appeased. A unique insight into a unique man and the golfer of the decade. And the reason we're going to start with this is because, as some of you may know, Mick O'Keefe's line of work as CEO of Teneo Ireland is in the sports sponsorship, PR. Your company will be involved in setting up a lot of interviews with people who would come into these offices quite regularly as well. They would be promoting a product, and they'd come in and they'd have a chat. And when you came in this morning, you weren't too pleased, particularly with the opening few paragraphs, which is what I'll actually read out to set things up.
Ben to raise 3 kids. This man's trying to put me out of business here.
I'll read these opening few paragraphs just to set the scene of what irked Mick O'Keefe this morning. It's a sad indictment of our business these days that interviews with global superstars are generally not worth the paper they're written on. Ask Greg Baum. A couple of weeks ago, Baum, one of Australia's best sports writers, was offered exclusive access to Rafael Nadal on the eve of the Australian Open. The offer was, he noted, subject to some terms and conditions. The interview would last 10 to 15 minutes max. The questions to be asked would have to be submitted in advance, and one would have to be about a travel insurance agency that is sponsoring Nadal. But wait, there was more. The subsequent story would have to carry a tagline at the end, noting Nadal's involvement with the sponsor. That's not all, far from it. The story would have to include a high-res image from the insurance company's campaign. That is, its ad dressed up as editorial. It would also have to include a picture of Nadal at a press conference taken against the backdrop of the company's branded media wall. Now, when we gave you a text this week to ask, were you interested in coming in, Mick, we didn't know this is how this story was going to lead. It just turned out to be a nice coincidence.
I just pointed his body. my client Pellegrino. No, but just no. Look, everyone's entitled to their opinions. I think. You know, I think he set out a very extreme example. Like there's, you know, the reality of the world we live in now at the moment is sports stars are, whether we like it or not, you know, they've multi-sponsorship deals, they've agents, they've agencies looking after them and so forth. And there has become, whether we like it or not, a kind of an unwritten relationship where sponsors and their consultants and so forth will, you know, while they're launching a campaign or doing a campaign or some product they're endorsing, will line up a series of media interviews when someone's at a launch or an event or so forth. And in return for exclusive access, or sometimes if it's a very high profile player, whether it's group access, well then there's usually a deal done in terms of, you know, a picture carried or some mention of the campaign. For me, that's a fair trade in terms of lining up somebody who's a big sports star in return for a company who's gone to the expense and the effort to line up a media day and to get somebody into the country oftentimes. I think the example that he's given here of the of trying to weave, you know, editorial into the thing, I think is probably an extreme example. We wouldn't do that necessarily and say, well, look, you know, you have to talk about how great it is to get the bus into town if it's a Dublin bus gig or something like that. We're very much kind of aware that, you know, a picture and a line about what that person's there to do. I think that's a fair enough trade-off. I think what is interesting is that, and look, he's fully entitled to his unaltered, not touched by the grubby hands of sponsorship agencies piece, and that's all. That's absolutely his opinion. Is that in the same paper, and it's always great to read this Sunday in the Sport on the weekends. There's a brilliant piece with or a very good piece with James McLean.
Which we're going to get to as well.
Yeah, no, but just you know, and I don't think the piece is any the worse for the fact that it was set up by the sponsorship people in Aviva. They gave great access to McLean, and he gave a really good interview, and you found out a lot about the guy.
He was, for what it's worth, he was in here during the week as well, speaking to Nathan, and gave up some brilliant stuff.
And I think where that worked really well, and we would try and do this ourselves, is where his child has autism, and Aviva Stadium have brought in a kind of a sound, safe room for children with autism and families with kids with autism. And I think actually the piece works quite well because it doesn't jar. Now, you know, maybe the example of Federer, is it, or Nadal, is it?
Yeah, there was Nadal, and then there was Federer plugging champagne.
How he enjoys his champers. You know, that, you know, is probably an extreme example of it. But look, we're all entitled to our opinions, and I think not necessarily that the piece was set up by an agency or a brand what makes it a good piece or a bad piece. I think it's the quality of the journalism that really determines that, and
the quality of the interviewee,
and the subject, of course. You know, sometimes you get a guy in a very expansive mood, and sometimes they're just not particularly great topics to talk to either. I think the McIlroy piece, you know, it's a big piece. You know, there's a lot in it, and you know, it's only part one of 3, so there's a lot to come in it. The style that Kimmage goes for, it's one of those styles that you either like or you don't like. He does the kind of Q&A format the whole way through. Personally, it's not the style I prefer. Now, there are interesting parts in this article, and again in another newspaper today, Darla Burns is a similar style in the Mail. And it sometimes is. You find yourself kind of have to, you know, put the head down into it a bit. But there are really interesting insights when you weave into it a bit.
I'll give you a chance to speak up there, Andy, on what we were talking about before we actually get into the bulk of what's in this interview, because there are some interesting bits in it. But I would say, I might put it to you from my experience of I've been going to these events for plenty of years now. You go to some, the interviewee could be brilliant, he could be poor, and you know, it's up to you to get something out of him. And sometimes they're just not willing to give up anything. And other days you're going to an event and you hardly have to ask a significant question. They're just giving you the information constantly.
Yeah, and there's a couple of sides here. I think what Mick's spelling out is absolutely right in one case, that yes, getting certain kinds of sports stars, you know, into an area where, you know, they wouldn't usually be giving access, yes, there's value to that. But a lot of these brand and media events, the guys are tuned out. They know it's a brand event and they're just there to be seen, get the photo, have a couple of words, off you go, and it can be plainly obvious. And that comes through on the page. That always comes through on the page. And yet I think there's 2 things there, which is the journalist has to get something out, ask the questions to get something out, but particularly when it's a group setting and stuff like that, it's not conducive to that, with rare exceptions. There are always exceptions.
I know. Look.
Are you going to scratch Andy's name off the email list?
No, look, I think, look, there's a lot to this, and a lot of the time, we're not talking necessarily about agencies and brands. I think you're talking about as well some of the clubs or some of the GA teams as well who hold regular media events. And, you know, we hear all the time, because we talk to journalists all the time, obviously, that they wonder sometimes the quality or the what they're getting out of that day when 7 fellas are talking to a guy and he's there and he's ticking a box and he's moving on. I think that can be the case where it's his turn to do the Tuesday interview and you get him on a bad day, he's had a bad training session. Look, that can happen to anybody. One thing I would say, and I think this is an indictment of our own industry, is that definitely if somebody's overbriefed or somebody feels like they've been over-controlled, I think you get a negative outcome every time. And I think you have to let somebody be comfortable in their own environment and not be, you know, looking at the watch after 7 minutes or tapping journalists on the shoulder and say, look, one more question. You know, I've been in interview scenarios where we brought over Toto Scalacci 100 years ago. You guys use him for the
football show.
That day he came over. He actually had a full head of hair when he came over. We didn't know who he was when he landed in, and he knew English, which didn't help. But you know, that was a day where, you know, he was really good, and 7 or 8 guys were there, and they all got access, and it was really interesting. But you know, I think you have to let it flow, and you can't over PR someone or over manage something. And if you're trying to force a message in that doesn't make any sense, well then it doesn't work. And we always give the example of, if there's a natural fit with the personality who's there, the sports star, and the thing that he's plugging, and they're there to make money too, and all that kind of stuff. The classic example was Roy Keane in the Guide Dogs we always gave, is that he was passionate about what he was there to talk about, and there was no like, why is he doing that? You know, the champagne and the tennis star, you know, you could probably ask, is a bit of an interesting marriage. But if he was talking about athletic equipment or talking about, you know, something to do with his kids, like James McLean was, well then it actually becomes a more natural conversation. So I don't necessarily think all PR sponsorship gigs should be, you know, go to be the gates of Hades or whatever. I think, although some people probably would, but unfettered access doesn't exist. So, you know, it's a kind of a scenario where we all have to play our part. But I think if it's done correctly, I think everybody can get value out of it.
Just out of interest, though, because what you said was interesting, like the expectation. What is the expectation on this day? What are we there to achieve? Because I think you're right. If there is a natural fit, the person is genuinely interested in being there for the thing, whatever the thing is, right?
Yeah.
Then they've already made an emotional investment into making sure that it's good.
Yeah.
You know, and that's a huge, huge difference than turning up for brand X, Y, or Z. And then the expectation around that set by, be it the organisation, even the club, and that they're attached to, or the sports organisation, they're always going to give them a bit of leeway there, because they know that's their thing. That's Roy's thing. That's James's thing. Yeah. It's different.
And I think it's changed. I think, look, the agents we talk to, we often have a conversation with them, and well, what does this guy like before you sign him up for a brand? Like, the one that, you know, we weren't involved necessarily, but Mike Ross had a passion for technology and mobile phone technology, and he actually genuinely did. And he ended up working, I think, with Samsung, and I think he worked with a couple of other brands in that space.
He's a massive nerd.
He's a tech nerd.
He takes a massive compliment,
and I think there's an example of somebody who, you know, and his agent and himself, and I think the days of, you know, and we've had it before in the past where fellas were turning up saying, what am I here to do? You know, they'd done no research and they were just out to, and look, that's fine, and that happened. But I think nowadays, I think organisations, it's incumbent on us as a consultancy to say, okay, well, look, does this make sense? Does this guy actually have an interest in this thing or not? If he doesn't, well, then we should get somebody else. And if he can talk to about it with a bit of credibility, well, then fantastic. And I think it's incumbent on the players and the agents themselves to do it. Like I had a classic example a number of years ago, and I'll finish on this, of a young player who was under a lot of pressure, a young Dublin player. Philly McMahon, who was, and he won't mind me saying it, I don't think, to do an event for a fast food company, and he's decided, even though it would have been nice payday, not to do it because he felt that it jarred with him and his values and what he was trying to achieve. It jarred with where he came from, and it jarred with how he thought he would see himself in 5-6 years' time. And that was a guy who was willing to kind of take a hit because he felt, you know what, that's not right for me and it doesn't fit me. And I thought, you know what, fair play to you. You know, and he's lived by those, I suppose, over the last 10 years or so.
Absolutely right. Sorry. We'll draw a line under that. The Rory McIlroy interview himself. There are touch on a few different things. Obviously, there's going to be various themes over the next few weeks. I suppose the big ones this week, the Open Championship 2020 at Portrush. His split with JP Fitzgerald are probably two that jump out. What are the bits that you want to start on with this?
I actually would go the sort of inside baseball route and say I don't like the layout of this piece.
Okay.
It doesn't help it. I'm with Mick on this. It's hard to read. There are some times where the strict verbatim Q&A is great. I don't think this is one of those times. It's not like we're not in areas here that you really need their absolute definite words because it's a controversial subject, or we're learning the truth about this for the first time. This isn't that. And I think I think this could have been done in a different way, and I think it would have made the piece just jump out a bit more. Because you say, I get to the end of this, and I think we all had a feeling with this, again, I wonder what's there next week. And it's not a cliffhanger next week. It's sort of saying, I think there's more here. I think there's more here. The one I was drawn in on was the piece, just jumping sort of two-thirds of the way through, about him working with Brad Faxon.
Yeah, sorry, that was very good as well. I should have mentioned that.
I think that's
on
really,
his putting.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So, will I read it just to
go for it? Yeah.
Touch this. So, they're talking about Brad Faxon, and McIlroy saying, "Well, the 2 hours were like this. This is when he started working with him. We were chatting and having a coffee. Then we went out to the putting green for an hour. It was really windy, and I said to him, "Geez, if it was this windy, I probably wouldn't practice my putting." He said, "Do you not putt when it's windy? Do you not play on days like this?" And he said, "Well, I guess you're right." So McIlroy said, he's very intuitive. From outside looking in, it looks like you're a field player. Would you like to have that in your putting? So McIlroy then explains that he's always been very technical and wooden with that side, but more free-flowing with the rest of his game. So he said, Faxon says, you'll just have to know what to work on. Bring your putter, a sand wedge, and a 5-wood. So they started putting with the different clubs, and he starts knocking them in with different clubs in the supposedly very, everything has to be millimetre perfect, the angle, everything perfect. And that was a really nice insight into somebody who has these two different sides accidentally and is now being told by this expert, why do you have two different sides? Let's just make it one side. I like that.
There's some nice bits in here as well, and I think one thing I found interesting, because we were kind of close enough to the Irish Open last year, and this massive disappointment that he didn't play in the Irish Open, and it's never really been bottomed out. Does he regret that or not? And I think the what ended up being for him personally a really difficult experience in Portrush. Would he have done things differently? And I think for the first time he's actually said, yeah, I probably would have. He talks about playing Scotland. He kind of played a few practice rounds in Portrush. He thought that was his best way to prepare. And in hindsight, he said, look, Kimmage asked him, would you have played Lahinch? And he basically says, look, the course at the Scottish Open wasn't preparation at all. And my understanding, the Scottish Open wasn't a pure links course. So, would he have been better off playing Lahinch potentially or not? But he said, look, I wanted to keep busy. He was like trying to keep his mind off, I suppose, the pressure of Portrush. So I made a decision to play the week before and not to play Ireland. So Ireland would have been the week before that again. So look, I think that to me was the first time I think that's been said publicly. And there's a few other bits in here as well that I think are interesting. But I'd agree. I think it reads like there's a lot more to come. The stuff around Tiger Woods, I think, to come, and other things. And he does discuss, and I presume Kimmage, when he was looking at this, has decided to take the Open, Lahinch, and a couple of other topics like you touched on as week one. And he's keeping it all back, and that's fully their view, and that's the decision they made. And he talks about the pressure and kind of what he was going to hit on the first day and all that kind of stuff, which I think is interesting too. So for those who want to delve into something deep today, and if they like this style, knock yourself out, basically. Yeah, it's
on the Open. I thought there were actually a few interesting bits on it. He's talking about when did you actually start to get nervous, and he was saying, I'm always nervous. On the range, I felt good, had a good warm-up, then started feeling it on the putting green before going to the first. And he describes the walk from the putting green to the first tee where you're going over the bridge, and he said it feels like you're a boxer walking into a big title fight and everyone's cheering for you. And he's saying that was the first time he felt, and quote here, Jesus, this is huge. And I hadn't prepared myself for it. I'd prepared for the golf and the golf course, but he hadn't prepared for the feeling. And I thought after he'd missed the cut, and when he was going on that big run on the Friday where he thought he might kind of sneak in, he was making huge birdies everywhere. People were cheering him on like it was the last day of a major. And to hear him talk afterwards, I actually thought it was one of the first times he really felt, you really found the human side of him.
I'd agree with that.
You really saw the vulnerability and the emotion, and because when he is at the top of his game, there's a cold-blooded killer feel to him, isn't there?
There is, and it's a funny one with McIlroy where, you know, research we do and this stuff and other people have done as well, and he doesn't score high as a person people love, right? And that's might because he's a global superstar. He's based in the States. I think he's one of these guys who's grown up in front of your eyes, so he makes all the mistakes in front of you. And, you know, he's so much pressure on him. And he's an unbelievable sports star, and he's a very interesting person. And I think Kim just trying to delve into that a little bit, talking about where he comes from and the feeling about that. But what I found interesting, and I agree with you, is that day when he spoke and there was a tear in his eye, you know, you kind of felt, Jesus, here's a guy you can actually relate to, and is a human being. He's kind of there in front of you, and he's having that really bad day. And I found interesting as well, for a guy who's done so much in his career and is worth tens of millions, he's saying, look, I was overwhelmed by the support. I looked up and I thought, holy shit, and I was just really nervous. And that's, I think, quite interesting to read as well.
It's the human side again, isn't it? It's just...
and golfers as well, like it's like rugby guys are interesting, lads are into soccer, but like the golf guys can be around for 25, 30 years, so you follow them through the stages of their life.
And you assume they've been through those situations so many times that they're not even thinking about the crowd that's around them anymore.
No,
and he's won so much down the years that he couldn't possibly be at a point at this stage of his career where he's won all these things and he's still somehow thinking of the silence of the crowd.
Yeah, and you know, guys have bad night's sleep and they get nervous and they do all these things, and you kind of forget that they're people after all and they make mistakes, and that's what makes sport great. I think McIlroy's one of those guys, I think over time will become, you know, one of the most loved sports stars, but at the moment he's in that kind of, he's coming out of the teenage years almost from a sporting perspective. So yeah, it's good. Look, there's lots in it and there's loads more to come, I'd say, but looking at it, so.
Before we go to an ad break, any other little bits in this just to mention? We probably have another minute or two before we're going to go hit the ad break.
Yeah, I like the bit towards the end where McIlroy is not happy in the little eating area off the locker room.
Oh yeah,
at Sawgrass.
Yeah, when he won the Players' Championship this year, or last year.
Yeah, when he's going like, the TVs are on, they're showing stuff. Why are the TVs on? This does nobody any good, lads. Can you just turn it
And all
off?
the guys he's playing with that afternoon are just sitting there having their lunch. The TVs are on, they're not even watching it, it's not registering, but it's the first thing he sees when he comes into the room.
Yeah. And he's going, no, this is not helping any of us prepare, turn it off. And he's kind of careful here where he's saying he's not talking to the lads, he's talking to the staff.
Yeah.
It's like he almost realises what he just said. But I was taken by that.
And he kind of hints at it as well, that it stems from the Masters in 2018 when himself and Patrick Reed have been in contention and he watched too much golf, I think he was saying, on the morning of it. And it just completely got into his head. He was seeing where people were hitting shots and it just completely overwhelmed him. Or it might have been an Open Championship, we were talking about that as well, where he just saw way too many people and the shots they were hitting, where they were hitting them, was someone missing a left and right, and all these things were getting into his head. But so they do give a taste of what's coming next week. So it says, next week, Kiss of the Scorpion. He's a hero and a pal, but he's also a scorpion and you're a frog. Hey, Tiger, why don't we cross the river together? Sure, Rory, we'll throw our arms around each other. Yeah, and he shoves an F-word dagger into you halfway across. So he's talking about Tiger Woods next week. Doesn't really give too much of an indication as to what's to come. Imagine a lot on Tiger though. But anyway, that is Paul Kimmage and Rory McIlroy. More to come from Andy McGeady and Mick O'Keefe on the Sunday Paper Review. First, an ad break.
Join that conversation on Facebook and Twitter. Almost. Off the ball. This is News Talk.
All right, you're very welcome back to the Sunday paper review here on Off the Ball this Sunday. We're on the air till 7 o'clock this evening. Just to keep you up to date, the Irish women's rugby team 13-7 in front against Scotland at the moment, just into the start of the second half. First half tries for Cleena Maloney and Sene Nepu, with the extras being kicked by Ellen Murphy. While over in Saudi Arabia, Graham McDowell has won the Saudi International. He finished 2 shots clear. Dustin Johnson in second place, finishing 12 under par, shooting a level par final round of 70. So Graham McDowell back in the winners' enclosure on the European Tour. So back to the paper review we go, though. There was a story, guys, we mentioned just before, well, in the early part of the paper review. James McLean speaking in partnership with Aviva about, he was helping to launch, for those who were unaware, there is a new special sensory room being opened in the Aviva Stadium for families who have children on the ASD, and speaking about his own experience of his daughter who is autistic, and it's a very powerful piece. He's honest as usual, I think, as we always expect from James McLean, but he was in studio with us as well during the week. He was speaking from everything from his family and his daughter to the abuse he gets on a near daily basis over in England, the impact Brexit is having on all of that as well. He's a man who always has a lot to say. Yeah, and look, he's an interesting person, an interesting subject, no matter what way you whatever your views are on him. And I think, like all these things, he's quite articulate as well. And I think he's an interesting subject matter. I think the week that was in it, where you had a politician use the word autistic in a very derogatory way, I think, this event happened at the same time. I think it's interesting that we have that conversation around autism, but I think with McLean, he goes into the background, he talks about the abuse that he gets, and I think he accepts that people have different opinions to himself. I think he's probably showing that he has a slightly vulnerable side, and it does get to him. And I think what I found interesting about this is when, similar to McElroy and other people as well, is that, like, they're human beings after all, and he likes to take time out when he gets time off just to kind of get away from everything. He doesn't hint or say that he's got mental health issues or anything like that, but you could see how the weight of what he goes through on a weekly basis, whether, if some people argue, he draws it on himself or he doesn't or whatever, that's all personal opinion. I think it's a nice flow to it. Dave Kelly, I think, does a really good job in it. And I think he says, look, if you can give it, you can take it. He's not afraid to stand up and have a chat about these things. But I think he's been taken back by how vicious some of the abuse actually is. And he talks about whether he's a kind of a trailblazer for other people coming behind him. I'm not so sure that's the case either. But he's in a more reflective mood as a 30-year-old man with kids and looking back and talking about the kind of what he goes through on a week-to-week basis. I think it's good as he has been quick recently as well to point out that in the last few months the FA and other authorities actually have started to support him, and he's big enough to say that in the past I was quick to give out about them when they weren't supporting, but in fairness, as the quote says here, as much as I criticise the authorities, they've been very good. Be careful what you wish for. They're nearly annoying me at this stage. My phone hasn't stopped. They're constantly in contact. But they charged a number of clubs with sectarian abuse and with threatening behaviour towards him. And he did tell a good story actually about being when he was on the show with us this week about a game they were playing at Middlesbrough, and he went forward for a corner and he was essentially marking Darren Randolph, who was in goals. And as he came forward, a bunch of Middlesbrough fans behind the goal started shouting awful stuff at him. You Irish this, you Fenian this, you know what. And he says he started looking at them going, your goalkeeper's Irish.
Apply logic to the mob. Yeah. No, they do go into that in the second half of the piece, and I'd agree. I think David Kelly does a good job here of weaving together a number of different subject areas. But McLean said that he met the FA and they asked me what my end goal was, and he said it was a good question and it caught me by surprise. I thought that was interesting because that shows a certain insight into the way that the FA are thinking now about this. Going like, listen, can we actually, this is what I think, can we actually align ourselves a little more with what you want? Can we understand more about you? Is it simply make it stop, or is there something else here? You know, and I think that was interesting. But you go later on in the piece, and I was struck by Kelly writing this, which is to say, McLean is a relative rarity in this sport in that you can challenge him, especially in group interviews, and that's an environment we mentioned earlier on, to point out inconsistencies in his arguments. He relishes the combat as if it were one of his crunching tackles. And you're right, like sometimes you can challenge someone, or maybe the challenge doesn't even come because it is in that group environment. But I like that.
Yeah, and I think that's a good, and I think Dave is also trying to. He's alluding to, and McLean is kind of discussing, is what's happening here a reflection of what's happening in the UK and Brexit, and there's a bit of a subtext there around, you know, is this society in the UK less tolerant, and you've seen all the coverage in the last week and Independence Day and that kind of stuff, and the question is put to him around where the UK is at, or where Britain is at the moment. I talk about Britain, people expecting Britain to change its relation with itself because it's broken its relation with somebody else. And McLean says maybe, and he wonders, hopefully before immediately scoffing at his own naivety, I don't know, I try not to get sucked into this kind of stuff. But Brexit has had a huge effect on everyone, and you'd hope it might calm down. It's a society thing. People are becoming more and more racist and more divisive. Whether that's true or not, whether people are more racist in the UK than they were in the 80s. Like, I went to football matches in the UK in the 80s, and it was open abuse of black players in particular. I'm not sure it's worse now. I just, maybe it just hasn't gotten any better. And maybe we hear about it more because people...
They highlight it more.
Yeah, possibly, yeah.
Mm-hmm. We should mention as well the stuff on his family. He's very, very good, actually, I think, at talking about... There's one piece, one paragraph, he says, when you see a screaming kid on a plane or in a shopping centre, the natural instinct is to try shut it down and get angry with them and tell them to stop. But now we know what people might be dealing with, and it makes you more empathetic. It ensures you don't judge people when you're out and about. If someone's struggling with a child or even an adult, you can't react until you see the whole picture. If you cannot see a disability, it doesn't mean there isn't one there.
But I before you even, if you lifted that out and you didn't even talk about autism, I think it's something which some people are much better at doing that than others. They're showing empathy. Mm-hmm. Okay, there's one thing that makes you count to 3 before even making a judgment on someone else's kid screaming. It's having your own kid.
I'd say so, yeah.
Because you've been there, and you know what? Sometimes you just need someone to not react when that's happening, and it's the best thing in the world. But like you, I was struck by some of the things in there. I mean, talking about what his daughter who has autism has to go through, and the comfort zone is, he says quite literally, the house with their family. Even if relatives come, that disturbs the comfort zone.
Yeah, and he points out as well, like we'll say, even the trip over to Dublin to launch this, he's saying essentially the trip was a nightmare. The family arrived in Dublin on the same day. Sorry, it was the wrong paragraph. Yeah. But he was kind of giving details that, even this trip over to Dublin to help launch this with himself and his daughter was, it was a difficult process because you're completely out of the comfort zone all over again.
That's going to put a lot of things in perspective. Mm-hmm. A lot of things in perspective. Even more than just, I'm going to use the word normal, and I shouldn't, but usual, I'm very lucky my kids don't have a condition like that to deal with, and I mean that in the very best way. Maybe there will be one, and we'll deal with it. And when that comes, I'll get perspective as well, more than I already have. But I thought, like Mick and like yourself, I thought this was a really nice piece.
Mm-hmm. Particularly so when you consider that he'd been out at a press gig and a lot of it was said, but he still managed to, I think, write something incisive and interesting a few days later. So fair play to him. Yeah.
Directly below that, Andy, is a piece that you were hot on when you came in today.
This
proper bit of football nerdery.
Proper nerding. This is Jonathan Wilson going full nerd
and Jonathan Wilson, for those who wouldn't know, at the best of times, he's a bit of a nerd.
Yeah. So this is all about football tactics and the evolution of same. That is what Jonathan Wilson does, and that's what he does here. And it's about the pressing game and the development of it. And it's a nice piece. It's quite dense. It definitely assumes knowledge, and that's fine. It's speaking to a certain kind of football fan, a certain kind of sports fan.
Yeah. So it was written in the Observer. It's syndicated in the Sunday Independent, directly below the James McLean piece on page 11 of their sports supplement.
Yeah. So he brings he brings the modern classic pressing game that you're seeing under Jurgen Klopp with Liverpool right back to 1983, near Stuttgart. And the local 6th tier side, Victoria Baknang, are playing a friendly against Valery Lobonyovsky's Dynamo Kiev. And the young German manager is looking at this team who he thinks must have snuck an extra player on, and it's not. It's just, this is the start of what Wilson sees as the modern pressing game. But it's not just about pressing, it's also about trends and the way things shift in football. And I'm just going to read a little piece here. It said, in attempting to trace trends, there is a danger always of oversimplification. The development of tactics is not linear, and it is subject to a range of forces, economic, scientific and cultural, as well as the input of inspired individual. What he's getting at here is that, yes, an attacking way of playing in any sport can have the upper edge for a while, and then people work it out. And they go, okay,
people copy it.
They copy it, you work it out, and say, okay, well, now we know how to neutralise that. Then the next little evolution comes along. It's not a complete circle, it's not a cycle, because you're learning from the thing that came along. But I really liked this piece. I loved it.
Yeah, it's a good. It reads well, and I think what he's done is quite good. Is that there's an oversimplification sometimes where people go, everyone plays a pressing game now, and and then it's a bit like the guy, everyone throws 12 men behind the ball, so that's how you do it. But
I'm a sweeper, I'm a sweeper.
Yeah, and I think what he's trying to say here is that there's multiple different forms of this pressing game as well. And he talks about Guardiola and his pass and press, and Klopp, who's kind of now very high profile version of it, and the team that's winning, everyone else tries to copy. Like if Dublin were up training at 6 a.m, then everyone else would be doing it, the kind of way. So there's a bit of that. But I think what I found interesting at the end was he talks about pressing, and he talks about the paradox of pressing, and is it a form of attack or a form of defence? And he's saying like that actually, it could fall into the category as being, I think he calls it proactive defending, where it's the perfect form of defending, thrilling, dynamic, in a world that demands constant entertainment. So I think what this has done, and what this whole, I think if you watch football now, I don't think there's anybody who doesn't enjoy the way Liverpool play, for argument's sake, which is that high tempo press, which is the complete opposite way to defend of the traditional way to defend, which would have been sit back, absorb it like a boxer on the ropes, and then hit on the break.
Or press within certain zones. You can let them have the ball in their half, but then when they cross the halfway line, you press. I mean, the teams like Klopp had with Dortmund, even that Barcelona team, when they lost possession high up the pitch, they were pressing up there to try and get the ball back within X seconds. But whether this style is actually an attacking move, Wilson also says, well, possession. That's not always attacking. So he says, well, Louis van Gaal, for instance, tends to use the word attacking simply to mean having the ball. And that's not what attacking is. Talked with the 2010 World Cup, where Jogi Löw's counter-attacking Germany were more overtly thrilling than Vincenzo Del Bosque's possession-driven. It's a deeper level than simply looking at, well, if you have the ball, you're attacking. But it's a good piece. I thought it was a really nice read on a Sunday.
And then one other football piece this afternoon. We're going to go Sunday Times, because, as I said when I was going through the back pages, Paul Rowan is a very interesting piece, really, about the process that led to Robbie Keane being brought in as an assistant coach of the Republic of Ireland. Revealed how Keane was lined up for Ireland coaching role before Mick McCarthy took over. So it's page 6 of the Sunday Times. And it's just got a good timeline. He's obviously got, I think he says he has, they've seen documents from the FAI. So it says, back in September 2018, John Delaney spoke a universal truth when he declared that the manager picks the backroom staff and he will live and die by those decisions. Then it goes on. When Delaney reported back to the FAI board on November 3rd, 2018, he said he had held a meeting with Robbie Keane, according to internal documents seen by the Sunday Times, and he saw Ireland's all-time top scorer assisting the managing of the team with Mick McCarthy and eventually becoming the manager. And obviously things transpired that the idea of Mick McCarthy becoming manager wasn't really received too well by people, so in the end they made a compromise. He'd wanted to get Stephen Kenny, and he's the under-21 manager. Stephen Kenny didn't really want to do it because he wanted the senior gig, so in the end we had the compromise of Mick McCarthy coming in for 18 months, Stephen Kenny taking over afterwards.
It's like... What you get is a confused...
It is interesting just to see how it all works, even with the negotiations. And
it is interesting, and it's worth a read. And I think what you get here is suitably grey, which I think you probably could deduce what happened is that a grand plan was set up of, well, Robbie would be with whoever's going to be the manager, and then he'll stay for a 4-year term, and then we'll put Stephen Kenny in charge of the 21s, and then he'll come in eventually, and then that was all fine. And McCarthy didn't seem too fussed about who has been foisted on him. And Robbie Keane, I'm sure, is great in his own way, but I think the spanner then comes when Stephen Kenny says, well, look, I'm not really interested in doing a 21 job. I'm interested in it if it's a 2-year stepping stone. And it's like the whole plan kind of changed halfway through.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure everybody was told that the plan was changed, and it was different people had, and which has now manifested itself in other scenarios. There's different people had different understandings of what was happening, and maybe weren't entirely clear. So I would say though, and I think this is the one thing I would give the departed CEO of the FAI credit for is I actually think putting Stephen Kenny in charge of the 21s for 2 years to learn his trade and to take over as senior manager is actually proper succession planning, and I think that will actually prove to be a good idea over time. I think that's a very unfair criticism that this was a crazy idea. I think what happened was that it probably just manifested itself in a way that it was Kenny probably wanted to have a go at the job and was saying, well, look, I'm not just going to be the 21 manager forever, but I'll do it if I'm going to get a stepping stone into doing the senior job.
Yeah, that's what this
whether
reads
Mick
like
was
to
told
me.
it or not.
That's exactly this reads to me like an insight into how a series of compromises took place.
Yeah. And I actually think even if you agree or disagree with the entire thing, I actually just think it's interesting to see how a phone call led to another phone call, and you had to check with this person wasn't keen on something, so you're going to go back and run another idea past, and all those little compromises and how they come together.
Yeah, and it's easy to criticise John Delaney, and as soon as you see, firstly, there's a nice smiling John Delaney photo, right? And you'll always jump one way when you see that, right? But it's not sympathy for the position, but I would just read this as it is, going, yeah, they were trying to do a plan that had succession.
Yeah.
And the succession plan changed. And here's how that happened. And one person, Stephen Kenny, reckoned, no, my hand's a little stronger. The Irish public reckoned, Mick McCarthy's hand's a little weaker. Robbie Keane's going, I still want the job. And I don't know, it's nice, it's really good. I will say...
is the other thing actually
the point he's making is that Robbie Keane has been given a 4-year deal, but actually he's made the point that every manager should pick his backroom team.
Yeah.
But he's already given him one of them.
Yeah, and Mick did. Mick's going like, I'm bringing Terry Connor. Will you take Robbie too? Fine.
Yeah.
If you're paying, grand.
Exactly. But what I think on the other side of John Delaney then, it does show that it probably did all kind of start because John Delaney had sought out Robbie Keane specifically, and how it was Robbie Keane that actually complicated a lot of the process.
That's the bit which is, it kind of gets lost back at this. It happens at the start where you're told that there's a direct relationship there. Yeah. Right? That is probably unusual. In the bigger picture, that the direct relationship is between the next man that you want up, a guy who had, a bit of coaching experience in India. This is long-term succession planning. This should be, perhaps in a different world, the person who you want managing the under 21s for a while, and let him come up that way. But no, it's good. Well done, Paul Rowan. It's a good piece.
Yeah, it's very good. So, and just a final bit of detail. So, the contract has to be renegotiated with Robbie Keane when he got his move to Middlesbrough. So it says the contract was renegotiated in June last year when Keane became Jonathan Woodgate's assistant at Middlesbrough. Then the general manager, Noel Mooney, who had stepped in when Delaney was sent on gardening leave, recommended a parameter of 30,000 to 60,000 euro if Keane was only available for camps and between 45 and 100 if he is also available for scouting up to 40 days per annum. On Friday, the FAI refused to comment on which option had been chosen, if any, or any other details. So that's where the confusion over Robbie Keane's future is coming, that the FAI haven't clarified exactly what his situation is. So that's it on soccer, I think, is it?
Yep.
Yeah. We'll take a little break in just a couple of minutes. First, though, getting towards just beyond midway through the first half at the Gaelic grounds between Limerick and Galway, more Trasny Callig is there for us. And Maura Treacy, what way has it gone so far? Even enough from what I can see?
Yeah, even enough. It's about, I'm just looking at my clock here, it's about 23 minutes gone. It is Limerick 7 points, Galway 8 points. And I suppose the very interesting thing is Limerick have done all the hurling. Like, they look like much better hurlers. They're slicker, they're faster, they're finding space at dangerous junctions, yet Galway are still in it. Like, at one point, like from a Galway point of view, Barry Nash needs to be involved in everything, and they've been bearing down on goal. Twice the Galway keeper has been really challenged, and with a little bit of luck and a tiny bit of skill, but more so luck, he managed to avoid trouble that the likes of David Reedy would cause them. On the other hand, now we're looking here at home, and Conor Whelan put Galway in the lead for the first time around the 18-minute mark, but as per usual, because Galway has those standout marquee players, the likes of Joe Canning, the likes of Cathal Mannion, they stayed well in it, despite the fact they really haven't done much of the hurling. Like Canning in particular, he scored a beauty of a point around the 15-minute mark on the spin. He didn't even eyeball the post, it just went right over. So yeah, it's quite evenly paced on the scoreboard, like you said, Neil, but on the playing, Limerick are definitely doing much more of the playing, but yet Galway are on top, even though Limerick do have a free in, and they'll probably equalise it again. And yes, there we go, they're equalised. So it's around 25-minute mark, Limerick 8 points, Galway 8 points.
Thanks, Maura Treacy. Just some other scores quickly in Division 1 of the football. It's Monaghan 6 points, Tyrone 4 in Castleblaney. In Division 2, Kildare 5 points, Galway 3. Roscommon are 5 points to 1 in front against Fermanagh. In Division 3 of the football, Louth 4 points, Tipperary 2. Cork 3 points to 2 in front away to Leitrim. Offaly and Longford level at 3 apiece. And in Division 4, Limerick beat London 8 points to 7. It's Wicklow 4 points, Waterford 1-1. Antrim 5 points, Sligo 4 points. And in the other games in the hurling, Waterford won 7 to 4 points in front against Westmeath. Dublin won 5 to 4 in front against Laois at Parnell Park. Kilkenny are 8 points in front against Carlow, and Wexford and Clare 6 points to 2 in favour of Wexford. That is around 25 minutes into that game down in Wexford. We'll have more coming up on the papers with Mick and Andy, including a lot on the rugby from yesterday. But first, we have to take a quick break.
Off the ball on News Talk. Tech Talk with Jess Kelly.
On this week's show, I sit down with Facebook's head of policy to hear how politicians are using its platform. Executives from Gomo join me in studio to answer your questions. Plus, we get hands-on with the tablet purpose-built for older people.
Tech Talk with Jess Kelly on News Talk.
Listen and subscribe to the podcast now at newstalk.com and on the News Talk app.
Exciting afternoons with Harvey Norman. Bring the cinema home with an ultra-high-definition smart TV and surround sound from Harvey Norman. The cinema experience with no queues and no trailers.
Go, Harvey, go. There are many reasons to drive an SUV, and even more reasons to drive an Audi Q3. Voted the best medium SUV in Ireland. And we're not surprised when it's more spacious, more stylish, and even more connected than ever before, making it built for all of life's journeys. Because whatever your journey, there's an Audi for it. Visit your local Audi dealer to test drive your Audi Q3 today. Audi. Vorsprung durch Technik.
When it comes to truly awesome entertainment, we're not playing around. Now, when you switch to Virgin Media, you can pick up superfast broadband and TV with Virgin Media Sport. All for just €55 a month for an incredible 12 months and €89 a month after that. The sale that leaves nothing behind, now on. See virginmedia.ie.
T's and C's apply. See virginmedia.ie. New customers only. 12-month contract. Offer ends February 28th, 2020.
With Leia Healthcare, we like to offer our members more. So when you join, you get more ways to look after your health, always. Like cardiac screening, access to a face-to-face assessment with a health coach, counselling sessions, and more urgent care clinics across the country. And with a healthy 5% off selected schemes online, you now also get more for your money. So join today. Leia Healthcare. Looking after you, always. Call us today or visit leiahealthcare.ie. Insurance provided by Ellipse Insurance Limited, trading as Leia Healthcare. Leia Healthcare Limited, trading as Leia Healthcare and Leia Life, is regulated by the Central Bank of Ireland. Offer available on selected schemes.
Come the day and come the hour. The time has come to get behind your team. Be part of all the Six Nations at D2, the home of sports. Watch all the games with action as epic as our 20-foot monster screen. Soak up the atmosphere with tempting matchday specials. Then keep the buzz going with music through the night. This Saturday, see Ireland take on on Wales. So why not give it your all? Answering Ireland's call. For reservations, email info@d2.ie. D2, the home of sports.
The Ryanair seat sale is here, with flights from just $19.99 one way. So beat the summer rush by booking your next trip today to any of our top European sun, beach or city destinations. And fly with Europe's lowest emissions, lowest fares airline. Limited availability. See Ryanair.com.
At Guaranteed Irish, we believe enterprise is at the heart of thriving communities.
Like Viatel, the largest Irish-owned telecoms company, who provide world-class connectivity, cloud and security services to thousands of Irish businesses, including Voxpro, Varming, Supermax and Taxback Group. Viatel will provide your business with superior service while saving you money on your telecom solutions. Visit viatel.ie for more information. Guaranteed Irish welcomes companies that are altogether better choices for our communities. So look out for it. Guaranteedirish.ie. Altogether better.
Look at the size of that jackpot! Derek, you got your binoculars the wrong way round. I'm trying to fit it all in. Seriously, it's too big to miss.
On Friday, the 7th of February, the EuroMillions Mega Draw is a guaranteed €130 million. It's too big to miss. Play responsibly in-store, in-app or at lottery.ie. Share the dream.
Whatever your journey, there's an Audi for it. Test drive yours today at Audi Centre Bracken Road, Sandyford.
The Sunday Papers on Off the Ball.
All right, you're very welcome back. The Sunday Paper Review. We're into our final few stories, really, the last 20-25 minutes of this Sunday Paper Review. Mick O'Keefe, CEO of Teneo Ireland, is alongside me, as is Andy McGeady, broadcaster and journalist and host of the Under the Sticks podcast. We haven't mentioned the rugby so far, guys, so we'll go there now. I suppose the general thoughts on Ireland's 1912 win against Scotland yesterday was, look, they won. It was pretty uninspiring.
Yeah.
That's the gist of it.
I think Andy spent the morning there comparing the out of 10s. I think at a glance, 6, 7 out of 10 for most players, and I think probably 6, 7 out of 10 seems to be the general consensus for the game and the result. I think we got to be fair here, though. Like, this is Andy Farrell's first game as manager, as coach. Sorry, normally you'd get an autumn internationals to get yourself right and to find your way around the place. Coming in playing Scotland with nothing to lose and nerves first day and a must win nearly almost is his first game. I think the big question everyone had was how much has the team changed since the Joe Schmidt era and the last kind of year in 2019 since the highs of 2018. And I think what's interesting is a couple of themes I think that have come out of the coverage. In my view, one is people are saying how poor the game was. I actually thought it wasn't a bad game to watch, actually, in patches. I think it was in the melting pot for a lot of the game. I think both teams tried. Conditions weren't fantastic. It's first game in, and teams are trying things. I think Farrell made the point he only had 5 training sessions, which you got to give some sympathy for. Neil Francis, ever entertaining, obviously talks about Japanese journalists who travelled halfway across the world, scratching their heads, going, "Why are we covering this crap?" Which I think is probably harsh. And what I think is interesting is the people have kind of come away from the game yesterday with, and this is maybe a symptom of the expectation of, that the jury's still out, and whether we take a 3-4 year view in this or whether people are going to be judging this team week on week, which looks like it's going to be the case. I think Francis is a tiny bit harsh. He talks about, I don't think Andy Farrell is a visionary, nor is he an improviser, nor would he be anywhere near to being smarter than Schmidt. The unspoken sentiment is that Ireland are going to struggle in this year's Six Nations. I think that's probably a bit glass half empty rather than full in my view. I think Ireland could easily turn Wales over next week with a big performance, and then everyone's talking about winning a Grand Slam, or winning the Six Nations Championship. I think that's one theme that comes out of it. I think there's a bit of how much have we evolved, and a lot of people, Shane Horgan says the same in the Sunday Times, is that let's wait and see, but okay kind of verdict, I think is what he's coming out with. And the lobby for Cooney ahead of Murray continues unabated, and I think they're just some of the bits that I would have taken out of it.
On the paragraph there from Neil Francis and Andy Farrell, I think there was actually a good one just above it as well. He says, let us just remind ourselves that this is still Joe Schmidt's team. You cannot be coached by one man for 6 years and then disregard everything you've learned, all his systems and ethos in the space of a 2-week camp, which I actually think is a very, very good point. That
it's a fair point.
In theory, what are we kind of expecting to happen?
Yeah,
in such a short period of time.
I highlighted that as well. I thought it was a reasonable statement, well made, right? Because this is game one, and this has been guys, and especially let's not forget that the Leinster players had been under Schmidt for even longer. He is in their rugby bones, and that is not going to change. And there's actually a huge amount of stuff
there are plenty
we
that
don't want to
probably
change.
Joe Schmidt has been there or thereabouts for most of their professional careers.
Yeah.
Exactly.
If not all.
But there's a huge amount. There's a huge amount we don't want to change. There's actually a load of stuff from Joe Schmidt era rugby Ireland want to keep. It's just that last little bit, that last bit of can Ireland be more comfortable in trusting their skills and just I think everyone sees what happened last year. We're not going to go over it again, but from that England game last year, we knew that something was very wrong. And it played itself out through the whole year. But I will say, France's piece is good. Generally sticks to rugby. And it's a good piece with some points well made. A good one here, and I don't know if anyone was listening to this on air. There was a little comment at the end of the Virgin Media coverage where someone very close to the commentator was heard
Don't
giving
say the
out.
words.
I won't say it. Was heard giving out.
Say what letter it starts with.
About another effing kick. But that's it. There was a lot of box kick that would have not have endeared anyone to the keep Murray over Cooney. But Francis is saying something very simple. The number one fundamental of the game when you intend to throw the ball around is to be in receipt of quick ball. If you do not have quick ball, just kick it into the air. I didn't think it was a terrible game as a whole, but there was a lot of sloppiness, right? There were a lot of mistakes. The breakdown was a bit of a mess. I really liked Francis talking about the Scottish side of the breakdown.
I think, is this the paragraph I have highlighted as well? Go for it.
Yeah. You can tell that Scotland are a second division side because when they gave away penalties, there was no sense of cynicism about them. You would have to wonder whether Jamie Ritchie, in particular, actually knows the rules of the game. I liked it. It's a nice piece of writing.
It actually was.
There is a bit of a narrative too that if Scotland were better, they could have beaten us. But sure, look, if my auntie, yourself, and I think, I think you need to give this manager time. The Virgin Media guys were quite good yesterday. They were talking about there were signs of innovation that maybe wasn't there before. I think the try was one where they kind of had a new move. I think Johnny Sexton's comments afterwards were very interesting in that he kind of said, more or less, I'm not going to quote unquote here, but we never really got that far ahead that we could be comfortable to be too expansive and to try too much. It was more or less the theme of what he was saying after the match, that if they had got an extra score ahead, well then maybe they could have opened up. And you got to give Scotland credit. Like, they came over, they were hurt, and they stuck in there, and they made a real fist of it. And I think it's going to take time to see whether he can bring a little bit more innovation or invention, I think, to the setup.
I'm not sure, is it because we're reading Irish versions of, we'll say, of the Mail or Sunday Times, or if Sunday Independent is an Irish paper, but there's not a huge amount on Stuart Hogg, aside from a couple of big pictures. But
and the post-match reaction, so you just see schoolboy error everywhere.
A couple of quotes.
But
the UK papers do go after him more than, obviously.
Yeah, it was one of the worst you will ever see. It was just, I don't know how he managed to do it. I don't understand his reaction immediately afterwards.
Actually, the reaction immediately afterwards, that's what jumped out at me. After he did it, he kind of ran on a couple of yards, and you could see in his head there was the thought process of, I know I've dropped this.
Yeah.
I need to pretend I've scored a try.
Yeah,
there was a real delayed celebration. Yeah. And even as he was celebrating, the camera went up at him. You could see the face. He didn't even believe it himself.
Yeah, and when you saw the replay, you're knowing why. Like, this wasn't close.
Yeah.
This was a rank drop. This wasn't one of those where it just slipped at the final second. It was a rank drop. It was absolutely awful. And was it Shane Horgan references this about what the forwards will have thought of it?
Yeah, I was trying to dig it out. I'd read it earlier on. I can't find the exact quote myself, but
yeah, we both read this and it both stuck in our minds that when you had, and Scotland did go through. We'll step back a bit because Mick made the point that Scotland, if you're anti-Milk and all that, right? But they did have huge periods where they had the ball deep in Irish territory. Like they had breaks, they made inroads, and then the forwards went up and set up camp. And yes, Ireland set up very, very good defensive wall in front of them. They couldn't break over. But when you have those periods of possession, when you see someone be so profligate with it like that, it's an absolute killer. And for it to be the captain, my God, he's going to do some repair work there.
It's really hard for Farrell, though, I think, as well, to come in as a new manager, but part of the old regime. Like, it's a hard balance to have in terms of there's a bit of continuity and bringing your own style to things, and also were you part of the last setup or not? You
the
know,
old defensive coach, he was terrible, lads. Forget about him. You know?
yeah. And I think a lot's going to be, a lot of will come down to next weekend as well. Wales at home is a real critical game because, you know, in these away, you know, the way the Six Nations falls, the years where you've got to go to Paris and London are usually very difficult, and you try and win your 3 home matches and try and win something away from home. You know, and I think, you know, there's a lot of kind of sitting on the fence here. I think fellas are kind of saying, look, Shane Horgan's word is the jury's still out.
Well, it has to be.
It has to be. But it's going to take time. You know,
yeah.
it's going to take him a year before he gets. You think where you can start.
It would be
properly seeing where he's going.
It would have been very, very interesting to me had we seen something wildly different yesterday. That would have been very, very unusual. Either way, like bad or good. The fact that we got something very similar to what we've seen before is unsurprising. You know, it really is. So how do you write about that? That was the challenge for me, looking at the papers. What would we see coming out?
Yeah.
And that's pretty much what everyone's going for. Shane McGrath in the Mail goes a slightly different direction, where he focuses a little bit on how Jonathan Sexton dealt with the officials and sort of going, this might have been a reason you didn't get it in the past. Really not sure about that. There are certainly 2 views to that. Some people reckon that he has a very direct style and he's a player of long standing, and this is actually a good thing. I don't think McGrath agrees.
He had a good game, though.
He does make a good point, Shane McGrath, about how Matthew Raynald didn't really help himself by starting a lot of sentences with, maybe I'm wrong, but... just stop saying that altogether.
A bit of loss in translation there. I thought Sexton carried the captaincy. I think he's carried it quite well in the last few weeks. I was at the launch of the Six Nations, and I think he carries it.
Did you think there was more backslapping than usual? He seemed to be coming along, going full James Lowe when there was a big moment. He'd come in and do there was lots more. It's like sort of, I'll get that in. I'm captain now, you know.
The new haircut.
Yeah, we'll have to move on from the Ireland coverage. Just very quickly, we're going to go down to the Gaelic grounds in Limerick. Maura Trasny-Callig is watching Limerick against Galway in the Allianz Hurling League. It was a level game last time we were down in Limerick. Maura Trasny, what's the latest? No sign. Okay, we'll come back to that. We'll carry on with our Sunday paper here, because we were talking about Shane McGrath in the Mail. There is a story in the Mail. It's a very important story in rugby, I think. It's a very difficult story to read, but I think it's one you really have to cover. And I think it's covered very, very well by Ian Herbert, who is interviewing Philippe Chauvin, who is the father of Nicolas Chauvin, a young French rugby player who died last year. So the headline is, "Mourning father wants action to stop more deaths. My son has died. It has to mean we should stop and think, but coaches are preparing players to play in a war." So, guys, there's some pretty difficult to read details in it about how young Nicolas Chauvin died last year. He was playing for Stade Francais Espoirs team, which is basically their academy team, against Bordeaux Bègles, and it was basically he got tackled by 2 players simultaneously, and there was extensive treatment on the pitch, and they go into detail on it. 20 minutes on the pitch trying to revive Nicolas before he's taken to Bordeaux's Centre Hospital University. He has fractured his 2nd vertebrae, an injury more consistent with the impact of a car crash, which causes cardiac arrest, and because of the starvation of oxygen, brain damage. He underwent emergency surgery to no avail. Those who tackled him are not even cautioned, though on the video evidence, how the tackle was possibly missed is unfathomable.
Yeah, and Andy pointed this piece out to me earlier. I think part of the reason this piece is interesting now is some of the language that's been used by some of the coaches in the build-up to the England-France game in particular.
Yes.
Around, we want to bring brutality, and I think the word violence was even used, if I'm not mistaken. I could be, but I know there's been a lot of that kind of macho kind of talk, and I know that can be interpreted in lots of different ways. I heard Felix Jones talk during the week, and he was talking about brutality can be, it doesn't have to mean, overly violent too. You can be brutal in a tackle, even a small guy can, without, it doesn't mean taking the head off somebody. And I think, look, this guy is obviously still very kind of cut up by the loss of his son. And I think what's interesting to me is that he's a big rugby advocate and a rugby fan. But he's just talking specifically around a few things here. And what is interesting as well about this piece is it's right beside another piece about Le Enforcer, and it just goes on about the brutality of this French prop that's going to play today as well.
If the buzzwords of violence and brutality around today's match need bringing into perspective, then look no further than the story of France's debutant prop. Like, it's first paragraph.
Rugby's a game of collision. It's a big man's game. So this piece is really interesting, and it's a good read. And but I think it's the context that it comes in that actually makes it even more interesting.
Yeah, this piece goes in a couple of different ways, and there's a couple of different sections to it. Herbert spells out, you immediately get brought into the conversation that the father is talking about viewing the footage of the death of his son. Mm-hmm. Firstly, you're going, I really would not want to be ever put in that position, and I don't even know how you would do that. He has had to, and he's had to do it multiple times because in his world, he's trying to get some kind of action taken. Yeah. And I don't mean legal, I just mean some kind of recognition that something definitely off happened here, okay? So there's a few things going on. There's a bit of dynamic between himself and Bernard Laporte and the French Rugby Federation. There's the section that you've spoken to, really, which is about the description of the injury and the match itself, and that is a very hard read. But then there's a bit, Mick, that you reference, which is about he does not want to speak against rugby as a sport. Said, rugby has been part of our lives. It was my son's life. We watched games together. We talked about the game together. But then he changes. He's saying, but it is not a game of destruction, okay? So this is where he changes slightly, because he's saying that some of the language that there's between Herbert and Chauvin, the language that's being used is not helpful. And said, well, Stade Francais have undertaken to broadcast paragraph 11 of World Rugby's Law 9. Players must not do anything that is reckless or dangerous to others, and they broadcast that at the pre-match and pin it to the dressing room indoors. That to me is key, okay? Because so many of the injuries that we see now, a lot of them are about being reckless. Launching yourself shoulder first, no arms, into someone's knee. That can be a career ender. We saw one in the match yesterday where Peter O'Mahony was treated because there was a shoulder came straight down into the middle of a breakdown where O'Mahony had just made a steal. He completes the steal, and then he said, the body kind of then comes to terms with the fact, I've got a big wallop here. Some of the Irish players were not happy. They wanted that reviewed. But that's what I see the message coming through, that he says, this was reckless. This is the part we need to stop, because it is actually making our game more dangerous than it needs to be.
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head, and I think what he's trying to say in this piece is it's not necessarily rugby the game, and it's not even the rules. It's how people are preparing players to play, and the overemphasis on brutality, I think, is the word he uses. And I think it's like rugby's one of those games where there's an onus on yourself and your behaviour, I think, in terms of there's opportunity to do people damage a lot of the time, and it's that kind of behaviour, I think, is what he's saying, that you got to prepare players in a way that is respectful, so that when they do go out, if somebody's head is there, it's not there to be trampled on.
You're bang on correct that it isn't just about protecting yourself, it is actually all the time about protecting your opponent, even in the tackle.
Yeah.
Part of making a tackle is putting them back to the ground. You can't just say, well, I've lifted them up, my job's done. There is this weird, and I know from outside rugby it must seem incredibly strange that there's a responsibility, a duty of care to your opponent, but it is there, and that's what the word reckless really gets to the heart of.
And I think that's his, and in fairness to him, he's not, changed rules and tackled heights and whatever. Yeah. He's talking about here, he said, my son has died, this has happened, but it has to mean we stop and think. Coaches are preparing players for war. Nobody should attempt something that endangers others. This is a wonderful sport, but shouldn't be one played at any price. And that's kind of the key, really, to that piece. It's like driving a car. You're responsible for yourself, but your behaviour can impact so many other people, and particularly rugby, much more so, I think, than Gaelic games or soccer or any other sport where you're in those kind of zones and in those kind of points of contact where you can actually really hurt somebody.
Right, we have time for probably a couple more pieces before the end of the paper review. If you want to have a look through very quickly and make up your minds, because first we're going to go back to the Gaelic grounds, where we do have Maura Treacy waiting to speak to us. You're back with us.
I am back. It was a cold. I couldn't cope. I just said, no, I'm just going to turn to an ice block here. But all jokes aside, there's children down in front of us here putting on a brilliant halftime show playing football, and they're not feeling the cold. And it's actually really entertaining. There's a girl here wearing number 24, and if she doesn't line out for Limerick playing football in the future, something's gone very wrong in football development in this county. She's amazing. But you're not here to hear about the little halftime show from the kids. You hear about the halftime score. It is Limerick 12 points, Galway 9 points. Limerick have done all the hurling. Galway are still keeping with them. The Galway keeper, Aidan Murphy, I was saying to you guys earlier, he's been tested 3 times in the first half. You feel at some point they're going to leak a goal. Twice by David Reedy, once by Seamus Flanagan. But so far, and really with a lot of luck as well, there were misfires or ones that went over the bar that should have gone under the bar. He's holding firm. Limerick really do look sharper. They're just swifter. Their stick hurling is actually quite good for this time of year. And I'm watching, there's one man out there with a pitchfork, really an exercise in futility, trying to put together some of the divots that have been dug up about the place. And there's been a lot of ground hurling, as you can imagine. The pitch looks very heavy. It's been cut up. And Canning really has kept Galway in the game, as you'd expect. Joe Canning, he's scoring frees, and he got a beautiful point there, turned around on the spin, didn't even look at the post, sailed it over the bar, and he's kept Galway well in it. So to Limerick, 12 points, Galway 9 points. But I couldn't tell you how it's going to end up, but I do imagine if Limerick get the goal, that's it.
Maura Treacy, thanks a million. We'll be back to you into the second half. I see a tweet that's been put forward into me here from Willie Hegarty on Shannonside FM. Roscommon make history today, the first team to play a National League game outside the EU since the 1970s, as Roscommon hurlers played in Down today. So that's one for the table quiz. But we do have about 5-6 minutes left.
Sure.
Where do we want to go?
Just quickly on, and I know the game is on now at the moment, is the a couple of people have focused in on the Davy Fitzgerald, Brian Lohan relationship.
Yeah.
And this would be a story that probably people outside hurling circles wouldn't have known about. It comes back to a Fitzgibbon Cup match where Davy, kind of his team in classic only GA style appeared out of the bushes.
It's such a classic GA move, isn't it?
Appeared out of the bushes and went down and kind of set themselves up in the part of the pitch where UL had been, Davy was managing LIT. And how that bad blood is festered. It's an interesting read, and it's in. Dennis Walsh does a good job in it, and Dermot Crowe as well does a really good job. Both of them would be, well informed in this. What I found interesting though was, they go on to a number of other incidents that seem to happen between the two of them, but how it's 25 years since Clare won in '95, which for most people who are involved in GA is one of the most kind of big, one of those Wexford, Clare, that era of hurling.
And for those who wouldn't be aware, Brian Lowe and Davy Fitz, teammates on that team.
Well, not even that, was full-back goalkeeper, and both, intrinsically, their successes intertwined. And I think, I'm hoping I'm not misreading this now, but Anthony Daly saying that, he wants all the players to come together, but there's kind of like an undercurrent of, maybe they won't even meet up in Croke Park on All-Ireland final day, to celebrate the 25 years. I don't think it'll come to that, but it just shows you how, these things happen in the heat of the moment, and the split that seems to have happened there. I think it's interesting, and it'll be interesting to see what the body language is like. And there's a good piece on women in GA as well. It's a very long piece, but it's
Sunday Independent.
Yeah.
This is John Green speaking to a number of players actually involved with the Women's Gaelic Players Association.
And there's a lot in it, and look, if there's a few pieces there. Rena Buckley, who is really smart lady, has some really interesting points that she makes. And we don't have time to delve into it too much, but the other one is Jarlath Burns, who is a presidential candidate. Sorry, I'm skipping a bit here, but just for the interest of time, he actually has some really interesting views on everything from Brexit to fixtures and all the bits that you get when you talk to GA presidential candidates. But his piece on Dublin I find very interesting, and it's something that hasn't really been articulated, but it's the question around investment in Dublin and people focus on the success of the senior team as opposed to investment in GA in the city, and he's an interesting view on it, which is something that hasn't really been articulated before. But there's lots of stuff there.
Andy, last final bits for yourself.
I'll jump around. Anyone who buys the Telegraph, there's some interesting stuff on today's game, obviously with their audience in France, particularly on Tom Curry at number 8, and also a nice little piece by Charles Richardson on the horrible man manager Fabien Galtier, where he goes around asking the various English-speaking coaches in France what their view is on
we have a couple of minutes. Do you want to give us a taste of some of the opinions out there?
Oh yeah. So according to, he goes first to Jamie Cudmore. Says Galtier is a horrible man manager. He's extremely good with his detail and his technical knowledge, but the week to week environment, he can't do it. Jeremy Davidson's very similar. It's his man management that lets him down. Then they move into talking about Sean Edwards. So they ask Richard Hill, good person, talks about defence. In general, the French player likes to be told what to do. In all their schooling in France with the teacher, the patron, is just, you do this, you do that. They're not used to working things out for themselves. They can't even own up to things. It's virtually impossible.
They talk a bit of stereotyping, is it?
It really comes across like that.
All of them.
Maybe Fabien Galtier just isn't good with the language barrier. Maybe that's it.
Yeah.
Maybe he's a great man manager when he's speaking his fluent tongue with his fellow French players.
Maybe.
Any other theories out there on Galtier?
A few bit like that. No, not you. You're not a huge man like that. I would go back and say the Nick Simon piece on that young debut prop, Mohamed Hawad, that's beside the Ian Herbert piece. It is worth a read because he's come from an extremely non-traditional background into professional rugby. Mohamed Altrad, the Montpellier owner, actually did an agreement with the local police force saying, we want him to play rugby, we'll keep him the straight and narrow. They said, fine, you're not allowed to let him back to his own area ever again. And that's fascinating.
And why was he not allowed back to his
because
area?
he had served time in a young offenders prison for robbery.
Yeah.
His passport had been confiscated. He was under curfew between the hours of 8 p.m. and 7 a.m. Altrad is saying he kept fighting, stealing. The area has small flats where people hardly have anything to eat. Essentially, from this area, you fight. When there's an argument, you fight. He arrived one day, he had a big cut in his hand to training. What happened? There was a fight, I had to get involved. But it's good because for people who wouldn't be aware, traditionally, if you look at France as a very big country geographically, rugby was in the southwest. Tiny pockets. If you ever look at the map of where all those rugby names are from that you see happening in the Heineken Cup over the years, you could throw a carpet over them. And this is a player who's coming from somewhere different, and there's a couple of others listed there. It's a nice little piece.
Right, so that's where we're going to leave it. Andy, Mick, thanks a million for coming in this afternoon.
Thank you.
We'll hopefully have you in again sometime soon. Full time at Energy Park in Donnybrook, the Irish women's team have beaten Scotland by 18 points to 14. So a winning start to the campaign for Adam Grigg's side. Misty got their third try, but the first two, Senna Nepu and Cleana Maloney, with the scores for them. So an 18-14 win for them to start the campaign. We'll have reaction from the coaches and players a little bit later on in the show. France-England just about to get underway in Paris as well, as we were talking about that game. And just to keep you up to date on a few of those GA games in the hurling, we've been talking about Brian Lohan and Davy Fitz. At the moment, it's Brian Lohan who will be the happier of the two. Clare 12 points to 4 in front against Wexford at half-time at Chadwick's Wexford Park into the second half. At Netwatch Cullen Park, Kilkenny won 12 to 5 points in front against Carlow. Dublin won 11 to 1-8 in front against Laois at Parnell Park. And in the football, Monaghan 7 points, Tyrone 6. It's 3 points to 1 for Meath against Donegal at Park Talton. That game was underway at 2:30, so still in the first half there. But we'll be back after the break with more reaction from yesterday's win for Ireland against Scotland at the Aviva Stadium. We'll hear from James Downey. We'll also hear from Mike Sherry and Malcolm O'Kelly.
The Sunday Papers on Off the Ball.
At Lexus, we have always anticipated the future. Relentless